Great. Thanks so much for having us here. As mentioned, our presentation today is about securing and protecting AI usage in your organization with data security posture management for AI, or what Microsoft affectionately calls DSPM for AI, because the alternative is a bit of a mouthful. Welcome and thanks everyone for joining us today. First, as you've seen from the other presentations, we do want to thank the sponsors for this event, Cyclotron, CryoSpark, Cabeza. Without sponsors, this kind of event doesn't happen. There are costs behind the scenes, and those sponsors do help to cover those costs. So please check them out, and a big thank you to them for helping to sponsor this event. So as mentioned, our topic is about DSPM for AI, or Data Security Posture Management for AI, and how you can use that to secure and protect your environment for safe AI usage. My name is Antonio Maio, and I'm a managing director with Protiviti. Protiviti is a global consulting firm. I've been part of the Microsoft MVP program for 13 years, and I'm fortunate to get to organize a similar in-person event in Ottawa, M365 Ottawa, as well as be on a podcast with two other great MVPs at m365voice.com. I do have a fairly active blog, and please do reach out and connect on LinkedIn if you've got any questions after this. We do love to connect and start a conversation about some of this topic. Anna?
And hi, everyone. My name's Anna. I'm a technology consultant working with Antonio's team. Primarily, day-to-day, I'm working with our clients implementing data security through Microsoft Purview solutions. I also have a blog at the link that you see here. That's really where I post all of the insights that I've been collecting over the years working and implementing Purview. And of course, as Antonio mentioned, also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to continue the data security conversation there as well. So on the agenda for today's session, we are going to start off by talking about some of the key data protection considerations for AI use cases that we see organizations thinking and talking about. We will then provide an introduction to DSPM for AI. And then we'll go through the key pieces of functionality for the tool. So we're going to look to understand our organization's AI activity, safeguard that activity, and also identify and mitigate data oversharing risks. Then we'll get into a live demo of DSPM for AI, and hopefully at the end of the session, we'll have some time for Q&A.
So we see organizations everywhere, so I'm sure you do as well, using and adopting AI to do things like improve their productivity, gain new insights on their data, and amplify employee creativity. I have never seen a solution pushed down from the top to users as quickly or as much as we've seen with generative AI recently. However, we've also seen organizations be concerned about how they're storing and sharing their data, and if users that are adopting generative AI are going to lead to data loss for the organization. They're concerned not only about M365 Copilot, but also solutions like Chat GPT, Gemini, DeepSeek, other AI solutions that are available to employees that might not be sanctioned by the organization, something that we often call shadow AI. They're concerned about if they have sufficient controls or protections in place for their data, what we often call their data security posture. AI has really reignited considerations for data protection or data security, and it's led to customers carefully considering questions like, is our data overexposed right now? Who can access our data through AI? Do we have the right permissions in place so that sensitive data is not being exposed? Or is AI going to enable people faster access to sensitive data? And will AI be beneficial to our organization? Are we actually managing our data well enough to actually benefit from AI? These are all important questions that they're answering or that they're asking. And in order to help answer these questions, Microsoft has introduced a solution called DSPM for AI, or Data Security Posture Management for AI. And that's the screenshot that you see here. And we're going to see a demo of that a little bit later. And I'm going to ask if you can go to the next slide. So to help answer these questions, DSPM for AI helps us get visibility and insights into AI usage across our organization. It actually helps us discover and view analytics on which generative AI solutions people are using in the organization. It actually shows us generative AI activities and what solutions those activities are happening with. It helps to enforce policies to better protect data and prevent data loss through AI prompts. You're going to see something called one-click policies that you can configure. It helps identify and mitigate oversharing risks through a data risk assessment report that you can run through DSPM for AI. And it helps us comply with regulations by applying controls for data handling through the existing Microsoft Purview solutions that hopefully you're already working with today. So solutions like sensitivity labeling, data loss prevention, communication compliance, and so on. You can see a few of those solutions listed there. You can almost think of DSPM for AI as a surfacing solution that allows us to access or enforce controls on all of these other Purview solutions. Now, there are certain prerequisites for DSPM for AI. You do need to, of course, have Microsoft 365 audit enabled, which is enabled by default in most tenants today. However, if you're still on an older tenant, there is a chance that you might not have auditing enabled. But if that's the case, many of the Purview solutions aren't going to work for you. So very likely you already have that first prerequisite in place. It does require you to deploy the Microsoft Purview browser extension. There are 3 extensions available. There's one for Edge, Chrome, and Firefox. Most organizations are using at least 2 different browsers, often Edge and Chrome, but sometimes we do run across organizations that are using Firefox still. So there are Purview browser extensions available for all 3 of those at the links provided here. Now, you need that browser extension for surfacing analytics or insights on what solutions people are using out there. But if you actually want to enforce policies on AI apps, on the endpoints, then you do need to onboard devices for endpoint DLP. And typically we do that by onboarding devices for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, MDE, at least in passive mode. So those we would say are 3 prerequisites, and that third one being specifically if you want to actually enforce policies on the endpoints. Now, it's also important to consider the roles that are required for administering DSPM for AI. Depending on the solution that you're going to use within DSPM for AI, there may be different roles that your administrators need to have configured. Now, the roles that are shown there are the ones that give you access to view, create, and edit policies and dashboards within DSPM for AI. So the Entry ID compliance admin role, the Entry ID global admin role, of course, and then the Purview compliance admin role through the Purview permissions page. And then if you want to give someone view-only access to DSPM for AI, you can give them simply security reader role as well. But you can then get more granular about that, and there is a link there about the permissions that are needed for different activities within DSPM for AI. Now, of course, an important word about licensing. There is a link there on Microsoft's Learn article related to licensing. Because DSPM for AI is a solution that surfaces policy analytics that are already captured in Purview solutions, there is no DSPM for AI license specifically, right? It kind of depends on which solutions within DSPM for AI are you going to use, and thus that dictates which licenses you need. Now, ultimately, if you have M365 E5 licenses and Copilot licenses, those are the licenses that give you access to all of the capability within DSPM for AI. But if you want to get more specific about just using some of the solutions and not others, you can reduce that. There is actually some of the DSPM for AI capabilities that are available if you have M365 E3 licenses and M365 Copilot licenses as well. And you can kind of see that at the bottom. Now, DSPM for AI is not called out specifically in the service description. It does require a little bit of research to kind of get to this point and understand which license you need if you want to go more granular than simply M365 E5 plus M365 Copilot licenses. And I guess to return to a point that we mentioned earlier, DSPM for AI does allow you to monitor and get analytics on which generative AI solutions are people using in your organization. It's not only about monitoring M365 Copilot. It does allow you to monitor Chat GPT, Chat GPT Enterprise, Claude, DeepSeek, Gemini, Perplexity, and so on. There's over 350 different Gen AI websites today that it is monitoring for. And you can actually get to the full list of solutions from that link there as well. So it's important to look at this as a solution for monitoring Gen AI usage generally and not simply about M365 Copilot.
Okay, so now we'll start talking about more of the key pieces of functionality that DSPM for AI supports. And as previously mentioned, the first piece is that it really helps you to better understand your organization's AI activity. So what are your users doing as it relates to AI? Which solutions are they interacting with? What data are they sharing? And who is completing these actions? So the first way that DSPM for AI helps you to better understand this activity is through the Reports tab. And these reports will show you the insights that are collected by Purview Audit, as well as the data discovery policies that you deploy that are AI related across Microsoft Purview. So as for the actual reports, we have 3 different groupings of reports that we can see in DSPM for AI. The first are activity reports, which really look at a high level. How many interactions are your users having with Copilot, with agents as well, with enterprise AI apps? So this includes something like Chat GPT Enterprise when you enable the connector. And then how many times are your users visiting other AI apps? So this is that list of 350 plus apps that we had included in the screen before. So next, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, not only into where your users are interacting with AI, but what your users are including in their interactions, we have data reports. Excuse me. So the data reports actually look at the content of the prompts and of the responses. So for example, they will surface things such as sensitive interactions with AI applications. This is looking for things like sensitive information types, matches for trainable classifiers, and this is going to surface in a nice graphical format like you see in the screenshot on the left-hand side. And it will be split up by the application that the sensitive interaction came out of. Now, there's other types of reports within this data grouping, but the idea of these reports is to really help highlight some data security risks coming out of your users' AI interactions. And now the third type of DSPM for AI reports that you'll see are user reports, and this is closely related to Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management. So this really helps to surface really another level of consideration when you're identifying data security risks. So if you have some sensitive data being shared by a risky user, this will help to really put that as a high priority in the data security risks that you identify with these reports. So the next way that DSPM for AI will help you to better understand your organization's AI activity is through the DSPM for AI Activity Explorer. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the classic Purview Activity Explorer, you'll notice that the experience and the overall feel of the DSPM for AI Activity Explorer is actually very similar. The main difference here is that it comes pre-filtered for AI-specific interactions. So these activities include the AI interaction, which is simply when a user submits a prompt and receives a response with an AI site. We also have the AI website visit activity. So this will recognize when a user navigates, whether it be through Edge, through Chrome, or through Firefox, to a specific AI site. We can also see whether any data loss prevention rules have matched on the content of the prompts and of the responses that were shared with these AI applications. And similarly, we can see if there are any sensitive information types. These can be the built-in Microsoft sensitive information types or custom SITs that your organization has created. So we can see if these contents of the prompts and of the responses contain SITs within them. So here are some screenshots. You can see we have that typical bar graph as well as the row by row view. You'll see more about this in the demo, and we'll be able to actually click in and see some details around every activity. All right, so now that you understand your AI activity, now that some data security risks were highlighted, the logical next step is to safeguard that activity. So DSPM for AI, of course, provides many useful ways for safeguarding activity. The first is through the data protection recommendations it provides. So there is a recommendations tab, as you'll notice, and these recommendations are really tailored to the current state and the current configurations in your tenant. So there are many such recommendations. A couple of examples just to put it into perspective. So the first one is fortify your data security. This is at its core a recommendation to create an endpoint data loss prevention policy that leverages adaptive protection to block elevated risk users from pasting or uploading sensitive information on AI sites. Then we have a more complex recommendation, which really combines the policy type recommendation that we just saw with the procedural recommendations. So the second one here, guided assistance to AI regulations. It's telling you to monitor your logs, which is very much procedural. Flag risky communications via communication compliance policies. Prevent data loss through data loss prevention policies. And also manage retention and deletion policies for the actual AI prompts that are submitted and the responses that are received, which is done through data lifecycle management and records management within Purview. And a final example here, this example is purely procedural, but it is very useful still because it's a great reminder for your organization's administrators to review the oversharing reports, which are called data risk assessments in DSPM for AI, on a weekly basis to really identify potential oversharing risks and remediate the risks before they become a problem. So on top of the recommendations page, DSPM for AI also has a policies page. Now, before we get to what that page actually looks like, I think it's useful to mention one concept within DSPM for AI, which is the one-click policies. As it sounds, these policies are created by simply clicking on Create Policies from the DSPM for AI portal. So you can find one-click policies mostly in the recommendations. So that first recommendation that we brought up as an example, that's actually an example of a one-click policy. You can also find one-click policies as part of the prerequisites in the overview page. But essentially, there are two groups of one-click policies supported by DSPM for AI. We have the data discovery policies, which help your organization to really collect the data to execute step one, which is to understand their organization's AI activity. And then we also have data security policies, which help to execute step two, to protect your organization's AI activities. And it's important to mention that although you click on Create Policies from DSPM for AI, this on the back end will actually create the policies in the appropriate Purview solution. And so, for example, detect when users visit AI sites, this has created an endpoint data loss prevention. So the actual policies tab that you'll see in DSPM for AI, that acts as a single pane of glass for your administrators to look at all of the AI-related policies that are currently deployed across Microsoft Purview. These can be one-click policies that you create, or they can be actual custom policies that you create within a specific Purview solution on your own. And really, they are split up by solution, so you have some good insights here. It's important to note you cannot create a DSPM for AI policy from this page. This is simply a page to view the policies you currently have deployed, view their status, a couple of details, and then you can link to the actual Purview solution that the policies are deployed in. This page is really useful for your administrators to review the policies that are currently in place and potentially identify policy gaps and remediate those gaps to avoid some of the data security risks that might come about. Antonio, you're on mute.
Thank you. Anna mentioned earlier about an important recommendation being to review on a regular basis the data risk assessment reports. Let's take a quick look at those and see how they help you to identify and mitigate oversharing risks in your M365 environment. So as Anna mentioned, the reports that DSPM for AI provides, and we often think of this as another oversharing report. The reports are called data risk assessment reports, and they're actually run automatically for you once per week. Those reports start the first time that you visit this page. So the first time you go to DSPM for AI and you actually visit the data risk assessment reports page, that timer is going to start, and those reports are going to start getting generated automatically once per week. Now, those reports will show you the top 100 SharePoint sites that were accessed by users. Now, this is not based on the number of times that Copilot used content in those sites. It is based on the number of times that individual users actually accessed those sites, and it's the top 100 sites that are reported, along with several other data points about those sites. So the reports are indexed by site, and they show you site level information. So you can kind of see that at the bottom of this side on the right side. It's going to show you things like the total items found, the total items that were accessed, and the number of times they were accessed by users, unique users accessing items within the site, total number of sensitive items, and those are based on SITs, on sensitive information types, total scanned items, total unscanned items. If your items are, for example, password protected, it may not be able to scan it, and the types of sharing links that were found on the site. These are all data items that are going to show up in this report, again, indexed by site. The idea behind this report is to help you identify, monitor, and remediate where you might have potential oversharing in your organization. Another key purpose of this report, though, is to show you where you have content that is not yet labeled with a sensitivity label, and encouraging you to actually apply sensitivity labels to that content, and then use sensitivity labeling as kind of a fundamental component that's going to help you protect your content when using a generative AI solution like Microsoft 365 Copilot. Now, there are also custom data risk assessment reports that you can run. So in addition to those automatic weekly reports that are run, you can actually click that Create Custom Assessment button in the middle there. And that's actually going to take you through a really quick wizard that's going to show up. There we go. The wizard's very quick. It's very short. It just lets you set a couple of parameters related to that custom assessment. You give it a name, you give it a description, then you would choose whether it applies to all your users or just specific users and groups. Then you're going to choose, does it apply to all sites or just specific SharePoint sites? And then you'll review your settings and you'll run the report, and that report will run and it'll be there available for you to actually open up and view the results from. So again, you've got these default data risk assessment reports that run automatically each week to show you the top 100 sites that have been used by users. And then you've got these custom data risk assessment reports that are also available in DSPM for AI. Now, you might be thinking this is another oversharing report that's available. And if we actually look at all of the oversharing reports, there's actually, four, and if I think about one of these, you've got 4 to 6 different oversharing reports that are available in Microsoft 365 now. Of course, you have the DSPM for AI data risk assessment reports we just looked at. Then SharePoint Advanced Management provides you their data governance access reports. There's actually 3 different reports in there. There's a sharing links report. There's a sensitivity labeling report showing you, where sensitivity labels are used in sites and how many items are labeled with sensitivity labels on the sites. Then you have a permission state report that'll show you all the sites that have permissions over a certain number. Like, show me all the sites that have more than 5,000 different permissions configured on those sites. So those are 3 different reports that are available through SAM, or SharePoint Advanced Management, and those data governance access reports. Then you have a SharePoint site permissions and sharing report that's available at the site level. And that one actually gets down and granular with files and folders and the permissions or sharing links on those actual items. However, that's only available within the site content page on a SharePoint site, and only if you've already shared the site with at least one external user. If you have not shared a site with one external user, the report doesn't show up, or the link to run the report doesn't show up. So that's our third type of oversharing report. And then our fourth is a solution that I very much love using. It's Microsoft Graph Data Connect for SharePoint. And that's a solution for very large enterprise class SharePoint environments. Think of environments that have 20,000 sites, 50,000 sites, 100,000 users, hundreds of millions of files. It uses APIs that are not throttled. So it can pull very granular data very, very quickly. And you actually use that solution using Azure Synapse, an Azure Storage account, the MGDC service, and Power BI. So many of those components are consumption-based. So you actually pay for them based on the amount that they are used and the amount of data that they pull. So it can be a meaningful bill, but in a very large SharePoint environment, there's nothing faster or more granular than Microsoft Graph Data Connect solution at pulling things like all the permissions across all the files, across hundreds of millions of files in a big SharePoint environment. So those are the four different types of oversharing reports that are available today.
All right, let's get into our live demo of DSPM for AI. Okay, so here we are in Microsoft Purview. I simply went to Solutions and navigated to DSPM for AI. As soon as I do so, I am taken to the overview page, where at the top you can see some of the prerequisites that we had mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, such as activating Purview Audit, installing the Purview browser extension on your browsers that are used by the organization, onboarding your devices to Microsoft Purview, as well as this one here, extending your insights for data discovery. If you click into it, these are actually an example of 2 one-click policies that you can create to begin collecting data around your organization's AI activity to support your understanding of really what your users are doing with AI, how are they interacting with it, and are there any data security risks associated. If I scroll down, there are some high-level insights on recommendations and reports, but I actually will not be reviewing those because we're going to do a more in-depth review on the specific tabs. So if we follow the process of first understanding your AI activity, we mentioned the reports. So these reports, again, are graphical representations. They use the Purview audit log insights as well as the insights generated by the data discovery policies to populate the reports. One thing to call out here is this is a developer environment, so we will not have all of the data populated. For example, we do not have Chat GPT Enterprise connected. This is why we don't have any data available in the second report that you see. However, for the activity reports, a great example is this first one here, total number of interactions over time that your users are having with Microsoft Copilot as well as agents. So I've ran a few tests. In this case, I have a couple of days ago accessed copilot.microsoft.com. I've submitted a number of prompts and received a number of responses. Every time I've done so, this has been registered within this report. You can also see the same for the total visits to other AI apps. So you can see here as part of my testing, I have accessed Deep AI, Microsoft Copilot, Perplexity, as well as Chat GPT. This is the free version, not the enterprise version, by the way. We also see the data reports. So again, this digs further into what is actually contained within the prompts and the responses within these AI interactions. So you can see here that the first report, sensitive interactions per AI app, within my interactions with Copilot, it has recognized some medical terms and conditions and some other ones such as the credit card number, Japanese finance, Portugal tax identification number. So you can get all sorts of different sensitive information types that were recognized here. Now, again, to call out, this is a developer tenant. This is why we do not have any unethical AI interactions as part of the testing. And we also do not have top sensitivity labels referenced because we simply do not have an M365 Copilot license to test with. However, you can see that we can still get insights not having this license with the other interactions that we are having. Finally, at the bottom here, so there are a number of user reports. Again, this is very much related to insider risk management. At a high level, I can see that the users that are accessing different AI applications for this tenant do not have an insider risk severity. But if they did, that could constitute a greater data security risk, of course. Now, we also have the Activity Explorer. So I will filter back on the last 30 days to get some more data. And we can see here that we have, again, the look and feel is very similar to the Purview Activity Explorer, but the activities that we can actually look for are those AI-related activities specifically. So if I scroll down a little bit here, there is this AI interaction activity, for example. And if I click into it, we'll get some more details on the activity. So when did it happen? What is the type of activity that was seen? Who is the user that triggered this activity? That was myself. We also get some details on the actual application this was done in. So if I look here, Bing web search, this is actually copilot.microsoft.com that I used to trigger this activity. And then below, we have interaction details. So there's a call out here that you, on top of the roles that Antonio had mentioned, like the global admin, compliance admin, in order to view the details of the interaction, so the actual content of the prompt and of the response, you, in addition, need to be assigned the Microsoft Purview Content Explorer Content Viewer role group within Purview. Since I am assigned this role group, I can see the prompt and the response. So I simply asked it for some test social insurance numbers. This was my way of really triggering the recognition of a sensitive information type. And this was its response. So we can see that down here, there are some sensitive information types that were given, right? And then at the bottom, there's a tag actually that says that sensitive info types were detected. So if I click on view related classification activity, this is going to take me to the other activity that is related to this AI interaction that highlights the fact that there actually are sensitive information types that were contained within the prompt, or in this case, the response, but it could also be the prompt. So another activity that I think is important to call out is the AI website visit. So this activity is specifically looking at visits to other AI applications. Those are the 350 plus list of applications that are supported right now. In this case, this was a navigation to Microsoft Copilot, again, copilot.microsoft.com, but there are instances here of me navigating to Chat GPT or Perplexity, for example. So you'll get the same type of activity details, user details, but something important to call out here is that some data may not be available. This is a call out because the prompt and the response, so the content of the prompt and the response that is shared with other AI applications will not be visible to us. Microsoft simply doesn't have that data available to flow into this Activity Explorer. So for Copilot and for enterprise AI apps, that data is available. For other AI apps, it is unfortunately not. So one way that organizations can kind of circumvent this risk is through the feature with Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps with an integration with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So the way it works is within the Cloud App Catalog, if you sanction or unsanctioned generative AI applications. So let's take Perplexity as an example. If you unsanction Perplexity, then you can automatically block users from navigating to Perplexity on their devices. So that is one way to kind of help circumvent the risks of not having the content of the prompt and of the response available to us. All right, so now that we understand what's going on within our organization, of course, we have to protect some of these capabilities. So the first way we have mentioned is the recommendations page. Again, these are tailored recommendations based on the current state of your tenant. We have recommendations to create one-click policies, such as this first one here. We can see the Create Policies button. We have some descriptions, what to expect from creating the policies, and other information. But we also have procedural recommendations as well that are useful for improving your data protection status. We also have the policies page. So the policies page, as mentioned, it is really a single pane of glass for your administrators to review the AI-related policies deployed across Microsoft Purview. We'll look at data loss prevention as an example. So the first one here we can see is actually a custom policy that was created within DLP. And shortly after creating the policy, we have this policy surfaced to us here for review. So we can look at some of the policy details like its status, its locations, and a high level of the policy settings. But we can also edit the policy in the data loss prevention solution, or we can investigate the DLP alerts as well. And by the way, these two buttons will actually take us to Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention because that is where the policies live. If we look at the second one, this is actually one of the one-click policies from DSPM for AI, which automatically creates a policy within Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention. So very similar capabilities. We can edit that policy further, and we can investigate the alerts natively within DLP. So the final page I'll call out here is data risk assessments. You'll notice that I am not going into apps and agents. That's because we will talk about it in just a moment. But for the demo, the data risk assessments, again, these are your oversharing reports. We have the default assessment that runs on a weekly basis. And we also have custom assessments that we can create to scope to specific users and to specific sites if needed. However, I will not be going into the results of the custom assessments because they are virtually identical to what is surfaced in the default assessment. So let's click on view details for the default assessment. So this is going to look at your top 100 SharePoint sites based on how many times the sites are accessed. And this list of 100 sites can change from week to week, which is why potentially a custom assessment may be needed to dig into a specific SharePoint site of concern. At the top of the default assessment, you're going to see some roll-ups of the insights and the information that was found by this default assessment for all of these 100 SharePoint sites. So how many total items were found, how many items that had sensitive information or did not have sensitive information was found within these 100 sites, how many items were labeled versus not labeled, as well as the specific sharing links that were used within these sites for the content. So if we click in, and here you'll see a long list of sites. These are the 100 SharePoint sites. If we actually just click into the first one, these same insights will be shown on a site-by-site level. So you can really dig into the granularity for a specific site of concern. So on the overview page, again, we see labeled versus not labeled, sensitive info detected or not. We can also scan your data. So if data was not scanned, which is thankfully not the case here, but as Antonio was mentioning, if there's a file that is password protected, it will not be scanned. So we can actually run an on-demand classification scan, which will look at all of your data, but that does come at an additional cost. On the Protect tab, this is really the tab where you have recommendations for improving the oversharing and really the data security posture of the site. So there are many recommendations that you can review here. A great example is to create, as you can see, a data loss prevention policy to restrict Copilot from referencing files that have a certain sensitivity label applied. So if you have a very very high priority sensitivity label that you do not want to have referenced by Copilot and distributed, potentially distributed with other users via Copilot, you can actually protect it by creating this data loss prevention policies. So I highly recommend that if you have a chance, go ahead and look through the policies and the recommendations that are in this page, because I think they're very useful for preventing oversharing and just increasing your overall data security posture. And finally, this last tab really has to do with running site access reviews. So it will really speak to the sharing links that you have used within this site. If you need some more information, again, feel free to check out this page, and it recommends running a SharePoint site access review as well as an access review in Entra. Switching back over to the slides.
Thanks, Anna. So one thing we wanted to talk a little bit about here when Anna and I were planning this presentation is what's new in DSPM for AI, because Microsoft is putting a lot of investment behind it, and we see a lot of new capabilities starting to show up in it or getting announced at some of the large Microsoft conferences. One key thing that's been added is a page to help you monitor apps and agents in DSPM for AI. And the page is actually called Apps and Agents. You can kind of see a screenshot of it here. The idea here is that it's designed to help you identify gaps in data security policies that might be assigned to apps or agents, especially as organizations get more into agentic AI, creating agents or apps that use generative AI in order to facilitate their workflow or their process. Anna, can you zoom into this just for a second, just so we can see it a little bit better? Right, so on the left side, you can see there's an apps and agents link there for the page in the DSPM for AI solution. And then there's various properties or pieces of data that's shown for every agent that is found in your M365 environment. Now, today, the Apps and Agent page is only showing agents that were created through Copilot Studio. We're hopeful that it'll also start showing SharePoint agents or declarative agents, but we haven't seen that yet. So we're hopeful it's going to be supported in the future, and we'll see where Microsoft takes this. You'll notice that there's a few interesting columns here. A solution here is considered monitored when an agent is actively being tracked for user activities, prompts, or responses. You can also see there's a user trend, a prompt trend, and a response trend. The user trend tracks the number of unique users that are interacting with the agent over time, and the prompt and response trends show the total volume of prompts that are submitted or the total volume of responses that are generated, kind of giving you a deeper view into the engagements that users are having with those particular agents, not just a user count. So this is going to be a great tool for monitoring usage and creation of agents as organizations start to get into them, right? Initially, a lot of people will probably start playing with agents, creating simple ones in Copilot Studio. You might end up with 100 Hello World agents, and if that happens in your environment, you'd like to know about it so that you can kind of mitigate that, perhaps clean them up, perhaps contact those users, see if they want to do something more meaningful with agents. So this is a great new addition we've seen come in recently, and it's still in preview. If we can zoom out just a little bit, Anna, back to the slide. And we also have the second capability that's new is a new export experience from DSPM for AI. So you can now export those reports in one of four formats, either Excel format, CSV, JSON, or tab separated format. Of course, the Excel and the JSON formats are fully structured and are useful if you're going to bring the data from those reports into other solutions, especially the JSON format. If you want to actually take this data and integrate it into another process, perhaps automated through Power Automate, ingesting that JSON format is extremely easy, and you're able to then do additional activities with the data that exported from those data risk assessment reports. And then we'd just like to leave you with a couple of closing thoughts before wrapping up and kind of bring this back to the initial questions that we asked, right? As organizations are adapting AI, there's those key questions we looked at the beginning. Is our data overexposed today, and who can access our data through AI? DSPM for AI is really designed to help you answer those questions, again, at a very high level by helping you understand AI activity in your organization and if a shadow AI is happening in your organization. It helps you safeguard AI activities by letting you enforce policies through other purview solutions that we know, like DLP, IRM, and so on. And then it helps you to mitigate or identify and mitigate oversharing risks through those data risk assessment reports that we looked at, depending on your organization. We talked about 4 different kinds of oversharing reports or data risk assessment reports, and the one or ones that you choose will depend on your organization, on how much data you have, and how quickly you want to get insights into potential oversharing that you'll need to remediate.
So with all this being said, we really wanted to leave you with 2 questions to consider. What are your organization's top data security concerns as it relates to the widespread adoption of AI? And how can DSPM for AI help you to better address these concerns? So thank you so much for tuning in. We do have some time for questions, so we'd be happy to take those if needed.